The stained evidence. Josephine Winters set her camera bag down on the kitchen counter with a weary sigh. Another wedding shoot complete, another perfect day for someone else immortalized in her lens. She rolled her shoulders, feeling the familiar ache that came from hours of maneuvering for the perfect angle, the perfect shot. Photography had always been her passion, but lately it felt more like an escape than a joy. Her husband Franklin's jacket hung haphazardly over the dining room chair, a silent testament to his hasty return home. He'd been doing that a lot recently, rushing in and out of their modest Portland home like a hurricane, always with somewhere to be, someone to see, always with an excuse that felt just a little too rehearsed. "Franklin?" She called out, hearing only silence in return. He must have headed out again. Josephine moved to hang up his jacket properly, a small act of care she still performed despite the growing distance between them. As she lifted the dark blue blazer, a small white card fluttered to the floor. She picked it up, turning it over in her hand. A business card for Vivian Ramirez, event coordinator, with a phone number scrawled on the back in looping handwriting that was decidedly not her husband's. Along with the number was a simple note, "Call me anytime." Her stomach tightened. Perhaps it was nothing. Franklin's restaurant supply company worked with event planners all the time. But something about the handwriting, the casual anytime, felt too personal. She slipped the card into her pocket just as her phone buzzed with a text from Franklin. "Meeting running late. Don't wait up. The third time this week." Josephine wandered into their bedroom, intending to change into more comfortable clothes when she spotted the laundry basket. She might as well be productive while waiting for her increasingly absent husband. Sorting through the clothes, her hands froze on a crisp white button-down shirt, Franklin's favorite, the one he wore to important meetings. There, just visible on the collar, was a smudge of deep burgundy. Josephine brought it closer, examining it with the detailed eye of someone who had spent a lifetime noticing the things others missed. It was lipstick, unmistakably lipstick in a shade she didn't own. Her photographer's mind immediately began composing the scene. Franklin leaning close to someone, a conversation too intimate, a moment stolen from their marriage. She held the shirt against her chest, feeling her heart pound against the fabric. 9 years of marriage, and never once had she questioned his fidelity. Franklin had always been the steady one, the reliable partner who balanced her more creative, sometimes chaotic nature. But people changed, or perhaps they just revealed themselves eventually. Josephine set the shirt aside and reached for her laptop. With trembling fingers, she searched for Vivian, Ramirez event coordinator Portland, and was rewarded with a professional website and a photograph of a striking woman with sharp eyes and the exact shade of burgundy, lipstick on her smiling mouth. She closed the laptop and stared out the window at the darkening sky. The evidence felt damning but incomplete, like a photograph with the subject just slightly out of focus. Josephine had built her career on capturing the truth, on framing reality in ways that told honest stories. She knew better than most how appearances could deceive, how a single moment frozen in time could suggest a completely false narrative. But she also knew what her instincts were telling her. Reaching for her phone, she texted her best friend and assistant, Talia. "Need your help with a personal project? Can I borrow the long-range lens tomorrow?" A response came almost immediately. "Of course." "Everything okay?" Josephine stared at the message, unsure how to answer. Instead, she replied with a simple, "I'll explain tomorrow," before setting her phone down. She was a professional at documenting other people's happiest moments. Now she would use those same skills to uncover what might be the beginning of her own tragedy. The Silent Observer. The following afternoon found Josephine parked 3 spaces down from Franklin's office building, her camera resting on her lap, the borrowed long-range lens attached and ready. Talia had asked few questions when handing over the equipment that morning, but her concerned eyes said everything. "Just document everything," Talia had advised. "No conclusions until you have the full story." Sound advice from someone who had witnessed her own marriage crumble under the weight of infidelity 2 years prior. But Josephine wasn't sure if she was prepared for what the full story might reveal. She checked her watch. Franklin typically left the office around 5:30 p.m., but for the past 3 weeks, he'd been staying later, citing inventory checks and vendor meetings. Today would be no different, according to the text he'd sent earlier. Big client dinner tonight. Don't wait up! The thought of another night alone in their bed made her chest ache with a familiar hollowness. When had they started drifting apart? Was it after the miscarriage last year? The grief had nearly swallowed her whole, while Franklin had thrown himself into work with renewed vigor. Different ways of coping, she'd told herself. But maybe it had been the beginning of the end. At 6:15 p.m., Franklin emerged from the building, straightening his tie as he walked. Josephine ducked lower in her seat, adjusting her camera. Through the lens, she could see his face clearly. Handsome still, with laugh lines around his eyes that had once been from smiling at her. Now she wondered who was making him laugh. He walked briskly to his car, checking his phone as he went. Josephine waited until he pulled out of the parking lot before starting her own engine. Following someone in real life was nothing like in the movies. It required patience, distance, and a level head, all things she was struggling to maintain as adrenaline coursed through her veins. Franklin drove to an upscale restaurant downtown, one Josephine recognized as a new French bistro that had been getting rave reviews. He parked and entered, and after a few minutes, Josephine followed, choosing a corner table with a partial view of the main dining area. She ordered a glass of wine to justify her presence and positioned herself so that her face was partially obscured by a decorative plant. Through a strategically placed compact mirror, she spotted Franklin seated with a woman whose back was to Josephine. Even from behind, Josephine could tell it was Vivian Ramirez, the same sleek dark hair from the website photo, the confident posture of someone used to commanding attention. Josephine raised her camera discreetly, using the tablecloth to muffle the sound of the shutter. Through the lens, she captured Franklin leaning forward, his expression animated as he spoke. Vivian reached across the table, her hand coming to rest on his. Franklin didn't pull away. The wine turned sour in Josephine's mouth. She continued to document their dinner, the shared dessert, the way Franklin paid the check, the lingering exit. When they stepped outside, Josephine followed at a distance, watching as Franklin placed his hand on the small of Vivian's back, guiding her toward the parking lot. Instead of separating to their respective vehicles, they both got into Franklin's car. Josephine's heart hammered against her ribs as she followed them to a boutique hotel 15 minutes away. Her hands shook so badly she nearly dropped her camera as she watched them enter the lobby together. She sat in her car for nearly an hour, staring at the hotel entrance, waiting for Franklin to emerge, hoping against hope for some innocent explanation. But the evidence was mounting, each photograph a nail in the coffin of their marriage. Finally, unable to bear it any longer, Josephine drove home, her vision blurred with unshed tears. The house felt emptier than ever as she downloaded the photos to her laptop, each image more damning than the last. She reached for her phone, intending to call Talia when a text from Franklin appeared. Meeting running late. Staying at a hotel near the client. See you tomorrow. The lie landed like a physical blow. Josephine set her phone down and opened the drawer of her desk, pulling out the business card with Vivian's number. For a moment, she considered calling the woman, demanding answers. Instead, she slipped the card back into the drawer. She needed more evidence, needed to be absolutely certain before confronting either of them. Tomorrow, she decided. Tomorrow, she would follow him again, and this time, she would get the undeniable proof she needed to either salvage her marriage or end it completely. Unexpected revelations. 3 days of surveillance had yielded more of the same. Franklin meeting with Vivian, lengthy dinners, disappearing into hotel rooms or her apartment building. Each night he returned home with a different excuse, each one more elaborate than the last. Each night, Josephine pretended to believe him, while the folder of evidence on her laptop grew. On the 4th day, something changed. Franklin left work early, which was unusual enough to pique Josephine's interest. Instead of meeting Vivian, he drove to a medical office building on the outskirts of the city. Josephine frowned, checking the address against her phone's map. It wasn't a hospital or a typical doctor's office, but rather a suite of specialty practices. She parked and waited, wondering if Franklin had been hiding health issues along with his affair. 45 minutes later, he emerged, looking somber as he checked his phone. Josephine quickly snapped several photos, then watched as he made a call, speaking animatedly before hanging up and getting back into his car. Instead of heading home, he drove to a small park they used to frequent during the early years of their marriage. Josephine followed at a distance, parking where she could observe without being seen. Franklin sat on a bench overlooking the pond, the same bench where they had once fed ducks and planned their future. To her surprise, it wasn't Vivian who joined him 15 minutes later, but an older man Josephine didn't recognize. The two men talked for nearly an hour, their conversation appearing intense. At one point, Franklin covered his face with his hands, and the older man placed a comforting arm around his shoulders. Josephine's confusion deepened. This didn't fit the narrative of an affair. She trained her camera on them, capturing their conversation, wishing she could read lips or hear what was being said. When the men parted, Franklin remained on the bench alone, staring out at the water. Something about his posture, defeated, vulnerable, made Josephine's anger falter. She had never seen him look so lost. Making a split-second decision, she left her car and approached him directly, no longer caring about being discovered. Franklin looked up at the sound of her footsteps, his expression shifting from surprise to what looked remarkably like relief. "Joe," he said softly, "what are you doing here?" She sat beside him, keeping a careful distance. "I could ask you the same thing. Who was that man?" Franklin sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Dr. Harrison. He's a specialist in grief counseling and other things." "Other things?" Josephine echoed, her suspicion returning. "Marriage counseling," Franklin admitted. "I've been seeing him for a few weeks now." "You've been seeing a marriage counselor without telling me?" The irony wasn't lost on her. "Is this about Vivian?" Franklin's head snapped up, his eyes widening. "How do you know about Vivian?" Josephine pulled out her phone, scrolling through the photos she had taken. "I know everything, Franklin. I know about the dinners, the hotels, the lies. I found her lipstick on your shirt." Franklin stared at the photos, comprehension dawning on his face. "You've been following me?" "Yes," she admitted, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Now tell me the truth. All of it." To her surprise, Franklin didn't deny anything. Instead, he nodded slowly. "I guess we both have our secrets." He looked out at the pond again. "Vivian isn't my lover, Joe. She's my business partner." "Business partner?" Josephine repeated incredulously. "We're opening a restaurant together," Franklin explained. "A proper fine dining establishment, not just the supply company. It's something I've wanted for years, but after the miscarriage, after we lost the baby, it didn't seem right to pursue it. But then you were so lost in your grief, and I didn't know how to reach you, and the opportunity came up. So all these meetings, these late nights, planning, financing, scouting locations. The hotel you saw us enter? It's a potential venue with guest rooms above the main restaurant space. We were touring it." Franklin took a deep breath. "I didn't tell you because I was afraid it would seem like I was moving on, like I was forgetting our baby. And then the longer I kept it secret, the harder it became to tell you." Josephine's mind raced, trying to reconcile this explanation with the evidence she had gathered. "And Dr. Harrison? After keeping such a big secret from you, I realized our marriage was in trouble. I've been seeing him to figure out how to fix things between us, how to tell you about the restaurant without hurting you more." "And the lipstick?" she pressed. Franklin winced. "Vivian hugged me after we secured the financing. She was wearing that burgundy shade she always wears. I should have been more careful." The explanation was so mundane, so far from what she had imagined, that Josephine almost laughed. Almost. "Why didn't you just tell me the truth?" she asked softly. Franklin reached for her hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she let him take it. "Because the truth is, I've been running away. From our grief, from the way we've been drifting apart. It was easier to throw myself into this project than to face what was happening to us." As Josephine looked into his eyes, she saw not the deception she had feared, but the same loss and loneliness that had been haunting her. They had both been hiding, she behind her camera, he behind his business venture, both afraid to face the wreckage of their shared tragedy. Confrontation and truth, the drive home was silent, each lost in their own thoughts. Josephine's mind raced, trying to reconcile the story of betrayal she had constructed with Franklin's explanation. She wanted to believe him, desperately wanted to, but doubt still gnawed at the edges of her mind. Once home, Franklin made tea, a ritual from earlier in their marriage. When difficult conversations were softened with warm mugs and honey, they sat at opposite ends of the sofa, the physical distance mirroring the emotional chasm between them. "I need to see everything," Josephine said finally. "All the plans, the contracts, everything about this restaurant. I need to know you're telling me the truth." Franklin nodded without hesitation. "I have it all in my office. But first, there's something else you should know." He set his mug down carefully. "Vivian isn't just a business partner. She's also becoming a friend. Someone I could talk to about the baby, about us. When I couldn't talk to you," the admission stung worse than the suspicion of an affair. "You could talk to a stranger about our loss, but not to me? You were so deep in your grief, Joe. When I tried to talk about it, you shut down. It felt like you blamed me somehow." "I never blamed you," Josephine protested. "Not explicitly, no, but you pulled away. You threw yourself into your work, started taking more wedding bookings than ever. It was like you couldn't stand to be around me, around us, around the remnants of the future we had planned." Josephine's eyes filled with tears. "I thought you were the one who couldn't stand to be around me. You started working later, coming home exhausted. We stopped talking about anything meaningful, and then..." She gestured vaguely. "All of this started." Franklin moved closer on the sofa, bridging some of the distance between them. "I thought giving you space was what you needed. I didn't know how to help you, so I focused on what I could control. The business, this new venture. It gave me purpose when everything else felt like it was falling apart." "And Vivian gave you someone to talk to," Josephine added quietly. "Yes. She's been through something similar. She lost a child 2 years ago. Her marriage didn't survive it." Franklin's voice cracked slightly. "I was terrified that would happen to us, that we were already on that path. So you started seeing a counselor, to figure out how to save us before it was too late." He reached for her hand again. "I should have told you about all of it. The restaurant, the counseling, everything." Josephine didn't pull away this time, letting his fingers intertwine with hers. "And I shouldn't have jumped to conclusions. But Franklin, the secrecy, the late nights, the lipstick, what was I supposed to think? I know how it looked. I got so caught up in trying to protect you and trying to find my own way forward that I didn't see what it was doing to us." They sat in silence for a moment, the truth of their situation settling around them like dust after a storm. They had both made mistakes, both contributed to the distance growing between them. The realization was both painful and oddly comforting. If they had created this problem together, perhaps they could solve it together as well. "I'd like to see your counselor," Josephine said finally. "Not alone, together. If he's helping you, maybe he can help us both." The relief in Franklin's eyes was immediate and profound. "I'd like that. Very much. And I want to see the restaurant plans," she added. "Not because I don't believe you, but because I want to be part of it. I want to be part of your life again, all of it." Franklin squeezed her hand, a small smile forming on his lips. "I'd like to be part of yours, too. I've missed seeing the world through your eyes, through your lens." "It hasn't been a very beautiful view lately," Josephine admitted. "Then maybe we need to find a new perspective. Together." Franklin hesitated, then added, "I think we should visit the memorial garden. For the baby. We never went together. Not properly." The suggestion brought fresh tears to Josephine's eyes. They had planted a small tree in a community memorial garden after losing their child, but Josephine had only visited alone, unable to share that grief even with Franklin. "I'd like that," she whispered, as they continued to talk into the night. Josephine realized that while she had been busy looking for evidence of betrayal, she had missed the signs of a different kind of struggle. They had both been trying to survive their loss in isolation, failing to see that healing could only happen together. The road ahead would not be easy. Trust, once questioned, was not quickly restored. But as Franklin showed her the restaurant plans later that night, detailed drawings of a space that represented hope and future rather than escape, Josephine felt something shift between them. A door that had been closed for too long creaked open just enough to let in a sliver of light. Rebuilding trust. 6 months later, Josephine stood in the unfinished space of what would soon be Renascent, Franklin and Vivian's restaurant. The name had been Josephine's suggestion, a word meaning being reborn or rising again, which had seemed fitting for more than just the business venture. She raised her camera, capturing the afternoon light as it streamed through the newly installed windows, illuminating the partially completed bar and the exposed brick walls. These photographs would become part of the restaurant's story, documenting its transformation from an empty shell to a place of gathering and celebration. "What do you think?" Franklin asked, coming to stand beside her. He no longer startled her with his presence. They had relearned the rhythm of moving through life together. "It's beautiful," she answered honestly. "You and Vivian have created something special here." The mention of Vivian no longer triggered suspicion or jealousy. In the months since their confrontation in the park, Josephine had met with the woman several times, initially wary, but gradually warming to her straightforward nature and genuine passion for the restaurant. Vivian had apologized for the misunderstandings, admitting that the late-night meetings and secrecy had been partly her idea, not realizing the strain it would put on Franklin's marriage. "We're still on track for the soft opening next month," Franklin said, his eyes scanning the space with a mixture of pride and anxiety. "There's so much left to do." "You'll get it done," Josephine assured him, lowering her camera. "You always do." The compliment was simple but significant, an acknowledgement of his dedication and competence, qualities she had always admired but had forgotten to appreciate during the darkest period of their marriage. Dr. Harrison had helped them identify these small moments as crucial to rebuilding their relationship. Affirmation and acknowledgement, he had explained during one of their weekly sessions. Remind each other that you see the good, even amidst the challenges. The counseling hadn't been easy. There had been sessions where they left more angry than when they arrived, raw with reopened wounds and unspoken resentments. But there had also been breakthroughs, moments of understanding that illuminated the path forward. One such moment had come during a session focused on their different grieving styles. "You retreated into creation," Dr. Harrison had said to Josephine, "using your photography to process emotions too painful to express in words. And Franklin, you retreated into building, creating a new business, a new future. Neither approach was wrong, but they took you in different directions." That insight had been transformative, helping them to see their behaviors not as rejection of each other, but as parallel journeys through the same storm. Now, as they stood in the half-finished restaurant, Josephine could see how far they had come. Franklin's arm slipped around her waist, a casual intimacy that had gradually returned to their relationship. "Have you thought more about the gallery wall?" he asked. They had been discussing the idea of featuring local artists' work in the restaurant, beginning with a series of Josephine's photographs, not the wedding portraits that had become her professional trademark, but the more personal landscapes and still lifes she had returned to in recent months. "I have some new pieces I think would work well," she said, "from our trip to the coast last weekend." The weekend getaway had been another recommendation from Dr. Harrison, time away from work and counseling and the everyday pressures of rebuilding their life together. They had walked for hours along the shore, sometimes talking, sometimes in comfortable silence. Josephine had photographed the changing light on the water, the resilient plants growing in the dunes, the patterns left in the sand as the tide retreated. "Metaphors," Franklin had observed with a smile, watching her work. Their shared language had expanded during the months of therapy, allowing them to recognize the symbolic in the ordinary. "I'd like to see them," Franklin said now, his interest genuine. He had relearned how to engage with her passion, just as she had with his. Later that evening, as they reviewed the coastal photographs on Josephine's computer, Franklin paused on an image of their intertwined shadows stretching across the sand. "This one," he said quietly. "This one should be the centerpiece." Josephine studied the photograph, their elongated shadows merging into one darker shape, distinct but inseparable. It wasn't technically perfect. The edges were slightly blurred by the movement of walking together, but it captured something essential about their journey. Two people finding their way back to each other, imperfect but united. "Are you sure?" she asked. "It's not exactly a traditional restaurant piece." "Renascent isn't going to be a traditional restaurant," Franklin replied. "And this," he gestured to the screen, "this is us, coming together again, creating something new from what was broken." Josephine leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. "Coming together again," she repeated softly. "I like that." They were not the same people who had stood in this spot 6 months ago. She with her camera full of evidence, he with his secrets and separate grief. The betrayal she had feared had turned out to be something else entirely. A mutual failure to remain connected through pain, a shared inability to bridge the gap that loss had created between them. The healing wasn't complete. They both knew that. There would still be difficult days, moments of doubt, old habits to unlearn, but they had found their way back to truth. Not just the factual truth about Franklin's business venture, but the deeper truth about what they meant to each other, about the life they were choosing to rebuild together. As Franklin wrapped his arm around her shoulders, Josephine realized that the most important thing she had captured with her camera wasn't evidence of betrayal, but proof of resilience. Not the ending of their story, but its continuation, altered by experience, strengthened by honesty, ready for whatever came next.